Hello and welcome back to Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at d1baseball.com. I'm your host, Joe Healy, joined as always by my good friend and co-host, Mark Etheridge. Before we get into the week one results around the SEC, of which there was a lot of interesting stuff, also, frankly, a lot of not interesting stuff. We'll talk about that. But first, I have to remind you that this episode of Highway to Hoover and every episode of Highway to Hoover is brought to you by Academy Sports and Outdoors, a wonderful, fabulous, fantastic name in sporting goods. I actually, as a matter of fact, on the way back from UNCW, Georgia this afternoon, I passed by the Academy Sports and Outdoors here in Wilmington. Those resplendent blue and red colors on the sign shined like a beacon across the street as I passed it. But we're just really excited to have them on board and sponsoring not just this podcast, but a whole bunch of stuff. We can waypoints. They have their name all over stuff here at d1baseball.com, and we couldn't be more excited about it. So thank you to all of the fine folks over at Academy Sports and Outdoors. Okay, Mark, you, as you mentioned before we went on air, spent a lot of time driving around. You did an ACC stop. You did Florida State, but you also went down and saw the Gators. So we will touch on that. I also did some non-SEC stuff. I was at the tournament at Coastal Carolina. I will be again tomorrow, Monday, as we record this. But I also saw Georgia and UNC Wilmington, so we will touch on that as well. As much as anything else, Mark, though, I find opening weekend, for better or for worse, because I do think there's some good and some bad, is mostly about me like doing the muscle memory of trying to remember how to do this. Like I just yesterday after, and look, nobody should feel sorry for us doing this, because like ultimately, we're getting paid to do things that we used to pay to do, like go to games. But I did have a moment yesterday, at the end of a long day where I'd been through 3 games in Wilmington and thought like, man, I forget how like gassed sometimes I am at the end of these days when I've been in the car and, you're sitting through pitching changes and, error-filled innings and extra innings and all that jazz. So it does take a while for kind of the engine to groan back to life. But that to me is what opening weekend ends up being about as much as anything else sometimes.
Yeah, there is. And, we are fortunate to get to do that and tell stories. But, in a lot of these venues, there weren't great games. Didn't mean they're not great stories to tell, but they're definitely, you had to kind of work a little bit to find them. It wasn't the great dramatic walk-off victory at the end and those kinds of things in most places. But those are coming. And a lot of the times, the things that we learn in these early season games, that's what ends up being the story later. And we're getting kind of sneak peeks of it, in this first weekend.
Yeah, it's a good call. Kendall kind of selfishly hoovered up all of the biggest games this weekend down in Arlington, and I guess that's the best place to start this discussion, Mark, is in Arlington. And it should be said, as we're recording this, Texas still playing Oklahoma State, with that game moving relatively slowly and what have you. Mark and I decided let's just go ahead and roll. And if something crazy happens at the tail end of that game, the reason we're not talking about it is because it hasn't happened yet. So there's that. But let's start with Ole Miss, Mark. A little bit of a weird weekend for them. Not mostly a good weekend, but strange in that a close shave win against Arizona to start the tournament off. Then they, lose big to Texas in game 2, and you kind of think, okay, well, maybe Friday's win was a little bit of a mirage, or just maybe Arizona's not that good because they went 0-3. I mean, that may still be true, but then they come out and just, at least initially in the game, Clemson made it interesting, but they just kind of beat the brakes off Clemson early in Sunday's game and really made quite a statement. And it was a weekend that, I said Friday morning on Weekend Waypoints that, this senior weekend rotation for Ole Miss is going to be the key to it all. And, Hunter Elliott was good on Friday, but the last 2 days, it hurt him in the loss to Texas. But then it's not like Mason Nichols was really great today when they beat Clemson, and yet they got it done. So I think there's positive to take from that, which is that, hey, maybe they can win some slugfests here. Maybe that's on the table. But then the other side of that is outside of Hunter Elliott, how much confidence do you have in that weekend rotation moving forward? The answer is we'll see. It's only one weekend, but I did come away saying like really good weekend for Ole Miss. You'll take 2-1 in this kind of tournament anytime, absolutely anytime. But it just didn't happen the way I thought it would happen, I guess, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah. Well, certainly it was a tournament that we had been pointing to, as kind of a measuring stick for Ole Miss. How much better are they? We all feel they'll be better. But when you see competition the way they did, and to have the tight win on Friday to kind of kick everything off, and you're feeling so good about it, and then to absolutely get demoralized by Texas in game 2, but then you bounce back, and it would have been really easy to let Texas beat you twice, right? After you lose the way you did on Saturday, it would. I didn't really expect them to come out and drill Clemson. I mean, that was a surprise for me. So and to do it with offense, to your point, I think that's a piece where because Ole Miss, you look at their home schedule and it is loaded. But if they can play with teams like Clemson and Arizona, you think that they'll be able to play with those other teams that are coming to Oxford. And that's going to be the key, because, I mean, you've got some of the best teams in the country coming to your place. You've got to win some of those series. I mean, that's going to be the difference, because the road schedule is, manageable by SEC standards, but it's still on the road in this conference. If you're hoping to get well on the road, that's a tall task. So I think this, where I'm going with this is, I think that confidence of having success against these teams can only help as conference play starts.
From an individual standpoint on offense, I think that the biggest positive here is the weekend for Luke Hill. Just because, look, obviously for the offense to be as good as they hope for it to be, it's going to have to be a lot of contributions from transfers in particular. But the best version of this Ole Miss offense is probably with Luke Hill being, if not the top catalyst, one of them. And so to do what he did this weekend, where it's not just that, hit a couple balls out of the park, but didn't strike out at all, drew a couple walks, being that type of guy, that's huge. If you want to kind of look around at the other end of the spectrum, tough start to the season for Owen Pano, still looking for his first hit as a collegian. And, again, one weekend, this is the best pitching he's going to face until SEC play starts. So he's got a few weeks to, kind of start to get things sorted out a little bit. But obviously he was hoping for, a fast start and didn't necessarily get it. Campbell Smithwick also hitless so far. Again, these are all small samples, but I thought the biggest positive was Luke Hill. There were others, but Luke Hill, going 5 for 9, couple home runs, putting the ball in play, all really positive things there for him.
Yeah, I agree. And that's when you have a player like Hill. I mean, he was their leading hitter in conference play a year ago, but he still didn't have the kind of year that a lot of us expected. So if this is what he is now, and boy, he hit 2 homers against Clemson, it does kind of change the math on Ole Miss. And I know we're some of us were kind of split within our staff on how much better Ole Miss is going to be. I think Aaron's really bullish on them, thinking they could, be finish in the top 8 or 9 in the league. And I'm not quite as high there, but I do think that they've got a chance to make a regional. And these are the kinds of weekends that really elevate your status nationally. I mean, they're going to, you would think with the I guess the rest of the pre-conference schedule, they're going to be favored in the majority of those games. They could come into SEC play on a real high. And with the last couple of years that they've had, that's not nothing, right? That's some actual momentum. They can kickstart things or rejuvenate a program that's really proud and has had some success, but right now is really hungry to taste it again.
Yeah, agreed. I tend to be closer to you on the spectrum of my thoughts about Ole Miss, but certainly this weekend doesn't make me think any anything more negative. If anything, I'm a little more positive about the outlook. But again, just this 3 games, we'll see moving forward. The other team out there, SEC team that was in Arlington this weekend, is Texas. Again, the Oklahoma State game still going on, but I think the biggest positive of them was Luke Harrison on Saturday against Ole Miss. Really strong outing from him. And yes, the numbers were what they were, and that's the biggest thing. But for me, I also he looked healthy. He looked, in a way that he just never. I mean, he looked healthy last year, but the numbers, ERA was over 9. He looked comfortable in a way that he didn't last year. He looked like the guy that as a freshman, we thought, okay, here's one of the next guys in line for Texas and this kind of long lineage of guys on the mound. And, to do it against an Ole Miss team that we saw against Clemson, what they can do offensively. So we now have that information in hand and can even be more impressed with what Luke Harrison did. So I thought that was the biggest thing. I thought from a negative standpoint, if you want to look at Texas's weekend and talk about where there might be concerns, it's that, they really did kind of let Louisville impose their will against their bullpen. They just couldn't put Louisville away in the opener. A couple of times let Louisville get back in the game. It's 2-0. Louisville ties it. Texas takes the lead. Louisville takes the lead back and walks it off. Like they just couldn't get the outs they needed, and that obviously was one of the big questions generally about Texas was the pitching staff, and there were questions about the rotation, but perhaps even more so about the bullpen, and that's obviously something to monitor moving forward because there might not be a worse way to go through, even for a good team. There might not be a worse way to go through, especially the SEC, if your biggest concern is a leaky bullpen. That's just a stressful way to live. So that's certainly something to monitor moving forward.
Yeah. I think heading into the season, we all felt really confident about their offense, but there were legitimate questions. Probably more with the rotation than the bullpen. And this week, came away really impressed with the first 2 starts. The third one didn't go real well, but the first 2 were amazing. And then the bullpen, certainly they have a lot of options, but they're going to have to figure out roles. And again, it's early, but I do feel like I'm emboldened by what Max Weiner is already doing with that pitching staff. He did such a great job at A&M, taking a staff that was okay and turning it into one of the best in the country. And it looks like he's up to his old tricks again down the road. So if Texas becomes, one of the better pitching staffs in the conference, they're an Omaha team because that offense is really good.
Yeah, and as we, fittingly as we speak and record this, Texas is on its I have the live stats pulled up. It's 4th pitcher in 5 innings. So, they're going through it a little bit against Oklahoma State. So we'll see. Obviously, we'll have that result in hand next time we talk to you guys. But that's definitely something to monitor. The offense is not going to be a problem. Like it's just such a good position player group. But so I was doing radio in Baton Rouge, and they compared Texas a little bit to Jay Johnson's first LSU team, where it was like, hey man, they can bash their way to a lot of wins, but they got about 4 guys in the mound they trust, and we'll see if Texas ends up being that kind of team. They very well could be. I could definitely see that. We will move on to some stuff that happened in places other than Arlington, Texas here in just a second. But first, I have to bring in a new sponsor to Highway to Hoover, and that is Tecovas Boots. Whether it's the leather in your glove or your tailgating chairs, baseball people know that quality matters. That's why we, here at Highway to Hoover, love Tecovas Boots. Born in Texas, just like yours truly, actually. Handcrafted with over 200 meticulous steps and comfortable from day one, they're perfect for wherever the college baseball season takes you. From road trips to rivalry games, post-game celebrations, or just everyday wear, Tecovas Boots are made to go the distance. Find your perfect pair today at Tecovas. Mark and I are anxiously waiting our fresh new pairs of Tecovas boots. Actually, that's a joke. I mean, I would love a pair of Tecovas boots. I just don't want, I just don't want the fine folks at Tecovas think Mark and I are sitting here tapping our toes, expecting boots to show up at our door. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Let's talk Vanderbilt, Mark.
Mhm.
They played into their own tournament of their own. This one out in Arizona. A road game against Grand Canyon, then a couple of neutral site games. They won a tight one against Grand Canyon, kind of got out to a quick lead against Grand Canyon. Then GCU kind of wiggled their way back into it late, but they hold them off. Then took a loss to Nebraska, which I think is probably fine. And we have Nebraska ranked. Nebraska's also played well the rest of the weekend. So I think that's a loss that it's, that's going to be, it was a 6-4 loss against a good team. Those happen. And then beat UC Irvine. To me, the most impressive thing of the weekend, they beat UC Irvine Sunday in comeback fashion. Really had to fight for that win. UC Irvine, also a good team, and they really had to fight for it. So there are some things we could nitpick here. I mean, Ethan McIlvain's start didn't go great. They're still a little bit shorthanded. Vanderbilt is no Brody Johnston, as we talked about, but those wins are quality wins, and the loss to Nebraska is not going to hurt. So I think overall, just a really positive weekend for Vanderbilt to go out to Arizona, win a true road game, win a couple of or win a neutral site game, and really just look pretty solid from start to finish over the weekend.
Yeah, and tip of the cap to leaving home and going out and challenging yourself week one, because that is difficult. I mean, when there's so many programs that they want to kind of work out those kinks at home week one against an overmatched team, and I understand the value in that. Do, but that's not the choice Tim Corbin made, and they challenged themselves and found out. I'm sure they found out some things about their club. Yeah, I do think that, pitching wise, McElwain's a key. I mean, they need for Vandy to be, an Omaha kind of club. He's got to be a dude. So to go with Thompson, if you got those two 1-2, you're in pretty good shape. He certainly had his moments. I think he struck out 7, but he was, he didn't have the command that I'm sure he'd like. But I do like that in the finale on Sunday, Vanderbilt scores 9 runs to win it, and it took every one of them. And I do think that there's something about the fight. There's something about when you need to win a high scoring game to be able to do it, because we've certainly had our questions about can Vandy win shootouts and that against a good team. They were able to do that on Sunday. So very it's, I think if you can go 2-1 against that schedule, I think you take it and you learn from it, and you're able to get all those, gain all that experience playing away from home and all that good stuff that's only going to help you later down the line.
From a player perspective, RJ Austin looked like the guy they're going to need him to be. I think it was interesting setting the tone first pitch of the season. He rips a double. It was okay, that's, hopefully that's for Vanderbilt's sake, that's a harbinger of things to come. Also a shout out to Riley Nelson, who is a JUCO guy, just from the Arizona JUCO ranks, kind of one of those typical late JUCO ads that you just add in the summer, because you need this or that, or, a very specific need. All the guy did was earn a start in all 3 games, and he went 6 for 13 with a double, a homer, and 5 runs batted in. You'll take that because again, it's not like, some of these teams that we're not going to spend a ton of time talking about. It's because, they beat the brakes off of, choose your, team that most of the SEC played against this weekend. These were legit teams. And that's a guy that certainly really wasn't on my radar in terms of, hey, this is a guy who could really be helpful for the Vanderbilt offense. And lo and behold, at least through one weekend against good competition, he was. And honestly, you and I have spent a lot of time in the off season talking about how, maybe it's Brody Johnston, or maybe it's a step forward from Barzy and Holcomb, or maybe it's, hey, maybe RJ Austin has more to give. We hadn't really considered the option of what if it's just some guy we out of left field, which, happens all the time. I mean, I don't say that facetiously, because that happens all the time in college baseball. And look, 3 games, I don't want to go crazy here, but that's just not a guy that was really on our radars. And here he was being arguably their best bat through one weekend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a tremendous story, isn't it? I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
and especially when you think about the Vandy recruiting model, the junior college ranks is not typically, plan A. So to bring in a guy like that and then him have an immediate impact, I mean, that's a great find to get him there and get him ready to play.
yeah. A fun story there. Certainly looking forward to seeing more of him and seeing what he can continue to do.
Hmm.
Next note here from me, Mark. I mentioned on Weekend Waypoints a little bit of a somber note, although a little bit of an inspirational one as well. I'm sure most of the people listening or watching this have heard the story over the weekend, but Cade Ballou, player for Auburn, this was Friday, Mark, correct?
Yeah, Friday
Friday, yeah,
opening day.
yeah, I thought so. Yeah, opening day. Mom passes away of cancer Friday morning. He plays the game. Kind of suggested that that's what his mom would have wanted, and hits a home run in an Auburn
Yeah,
win. And so it was cool that he got to have that moment in what was otherwise, I'm sure, a very difficult day. And
yeah,
I said this on Weekend Waypoints that I lost my mom when I was 19. Wasn't that much different than Cade Ballou in terms of timing there. And I didn't try to go out and play a Division I baseball game later
yeah,
that same night. But I can certainly empathize with where he's been, and I can tell you, having been through it, his mind was probably in about a million places that weren't Plainsman Park on Friday.
hmm,
And so to be able to at least, put together a moment like the one he had is hitting a home run in a Division I baseball game is hard enough as it is. To
right,
do it while he probably really wasn't. That's probably as the least focused. I don't want to speak for him, but like some of the least focused moments on a baseball field he's probably ever had, and he was still able to manufacture a moment. So obviously, our thoughts are out with Cade, because I can also tell you from experience that yes, it hits pretty hard. And Mark, you could speak to this. You've had loss in your life as well. Just it hits you hard right away, but then it'll also hit you when you don't expect it,
yeah,
at various other moments. So this is not just a one-time deal, losing a parent, losing a loved one. But it was cool to see him be able to have that kind of moment on Friday. So thoughts, of course, with Cade Ballou. But Mark, go ahead with anything you
yeah.
have on that.
Yeah, well said. I mean, I can't add a whole lot to that. I did think it was a really nice touch that the fan who caught the home run ball got it back to him. I mean, I love that, right? Um, but yeah, just a great moment and a great weekend, for that Auburn had been looking forward to because with their renovated stadium, and then they have that moment. Obviously, uh, you know, we'll call it a memorable moment that everyone there will certainly never forget.
Agreed. Here. We'll leave that there. But certainly, again, one more time, thoughts are with Cade Ballou and his family. Certainly, Mark and I aren't in the business of rooting for teams or what have you, but I think we'll be rooting a little bit for Cade Ballou this season to do some special things, because that'd be a whole lot of fun. Okay, Mark, let's move on to uh, Florida. You saw the Gators this weekend.
Yeah.
I will clear out of the paint and toss you the ball and just let you give us your thoughts. You were there on Saturday for their
Hmm.
drubbing of Air Force. What do you got on that small sample you saw with Florida there?
Yeah, a couple things really stood out. The first is Brody Donay. Remember, just this hulking figure from a year ago, kind of an all or nothing hitter, raw power. He has, we'll call it, simplified his approach at the plate, and as a result, he looked like a different hitter. He homered in all 3 games. He was able to make, you know, cut down on the swing and miss. It just, I mean, I don't know how long, how this will continue against better competition, but he looked like a guy who's going to hit a lot of home runs this year, and not be a 230 hitter doing it. I think he can do significantly more than that. Really impressed. And then another guy who exceeded expectations is Pierce Capola. The big 6'8" lefty. He's been injured, fought through it all, right? And tried to come back last year, fought through, basically came straight out of rehab into an SEC weekend starting rotation, just trying to give them something because they were just so thin on the mound. Well, not only was he good, but he looked different. He looked confident. He kind of had a swagger to him. And not only, the stuff's always been good, it just wasn't consistent, but he was consistent, and he was just he looked like he figured it out. And it's been a long time coming, right? Because of all the injury issues he's had. So I do feel like those were two players that gave me more than what I was expecting when I got to the park that day. I think the last thing on Florida is that, and I wrote something about this, of how they're last year, and really for several years, they've been really home run dependent, and they're still going to hit plenty of home runs. But if they don't hit the home run, they're not dead in the water, because they've got more speed, they've got more just aggressiveness, they've got more contact hitters. It's not just sit back and wait on Cags, or insert slugger A to hit to hit a 3-run bomb. They're going to be able to do it. And I didn't see Liam Peterson, but he was apparently just phenomenal on Friday. Kevin O'Sullivan told me that years ago, like last year, if he walked a batter, or he kind of lost his spot, sometimes it would get away from him, and it would continue for the next batter and the next batter. And this year he was able to kind of recover quickly, and as a result, never really got into the trouble that plagued him at times a year ago. And if we all believe in stuff, so with him, it's just that maturation of understanding how to pitch out of trouble. And if he's certainly making strides, we'll see how this continues once he faces some better competition. But all indications are he's going to be he's going to be a force to be dealt with this year. So I was impressed with Florida. I feel like it's probably a little bit better than I'm leaving it a little bit better feeling than when I got there on them. But again, we'll see what happens when they play. They have Tennessee opening weekend, so we'll learn all we need to know that weekend.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. The Capola thing is interesting, because I think I maybe have been guilty of seeing what he was at the end of last season, when he was, pretty well stretched out and was throwing 5-6 innings, but assuming, and then seeing him on the Cape and assuming like that just is what he is now,
Mm-hmm.
and just being like, okay, it's pretty good, but this was not necessarily what we were promised, and maybe being a little bit, in this case, maybe wrongfully disappointed. And it sounds like maybe a jump has been made, and that, we, at least I was not giving enough credit to the fact that he might have another gear to shift to, and we'll see. But I think that was probably something I was a little bit guilty of. Let's talk Georgia. Let's zoom past Jacksonville and make our way down, or make our way up to, well, in this case, Wilmington, but to Athens for the team that is Georgia. I'll be succinct. I have no worries about Georgia on the mound. There were some, Zach Brown did not throw the ball well today, Sunday, in his start. Georgia got beat 6-2 by UNCW. UNCW's good, so I'm not, just a tough day. But pitching otherwise was so impressive, just in terms of the depth. And especially today, as they had to go to the bullpen early, and they're just bringing in guys out of the bullpen. It's like Matthew Hoskins followed by JT Quinn, and like both of whom I was like, oh yeah, they have that guy. And so it was just guy after guy after guy with really good stuff. Not all of them as polished as they'd maybe like them to be, maybe not. Some of them maybe not as accomplished as others, but just really impressive in terms of arm talent. The one that was most impressive was Brian Curley. in relief
Yeah.
on Saturday against UNCW. He was a guy at VCU that would, he was like 92 to 95. He'd really reach back and get a 6 every once in a while, but it was kind of high effort. And now it's like 100 pretty easy out of his hand. He's changed up his delivery. It's a little reminiscent of maybe, Hideo Nomo or Daisuke Matsuzaka, where he's got a little hesitation in his delivery, but it just comes out of his hand so easy. And I'm really, really interested to see more of him this season and see if he can, what it amounts to. Because, he looked pretty dominant in this one outing, but, how does it progress? And something kind of interesting is in that delivery with his hesitation, he was clearly, as that outing was going on, messing with the hesitation. Like sometimes he'd quick pitch it. Sometimes he would kind of kick his leg back and forth. And he made a little, it's almost like he's still figuring out what he can get away with. And I don't necessarily mean in terms of rules, although that's also true because you could do some things that are a balk, but also just in terms of like, can I move this way? Can I move that way? Can I hold it this long? He's still kind of figuring out what it feels like in his body.
And did he change it with runners on base, or how did that work?
I don't think he faced a runner on base. So I'd have to go back and look at my scorebook, honestly, because I remember, shout out to the Georgia radio team, the press box at UNCW, while well run and comfortable, is relatively small. So I can hear the radio call from where I was sitting. And they kind of made that comment of like, well, we assume he's going to have to change that up with runners on base. And I don't remember that happening. So we'll see. I will be interested to see that, because that does seem like a big part of what he's doing now. And so maybe with runners on base, maybe it's a little bit of a different deal. So definitely something to watch. It's a good question. So no issues on the mound. Colton Smith was scratched from opening day. Minor back thing. They're extremely confident and not really at all worried. They assume he will be back this coming weekend. It seemed like from what I was hearing that he could have, if this was not opening weekend, he could have thrown in some capacity this weekend. So, I think that's going to be fine. And with the depth they have, like they really didn't need to push it. So a lot of positive there for Georgia on the mound. The offense was a little bit of a mixed bag, and they put up a lot of offense against Quinnipiac the first day. Okay, that's Quinnipiac. They feasted on UNCW's feast is maybe too strong a word. They put up good offense against UNCW's bullpen on Saturday, but against Connor Marshburn today of UNCW, they were no hit for the first 7 innings. And they went through stretches the first couple of days where the offense was kind of in neutral. And so it's a classic, maybe, if you want to think of this as a cop-out answer, fine, I can't stop you from doing that. But I would say it is a classic yes and no answer to, am I worried about it? The part where I'd say no is that all of the guys that are going to be the most important pieces here, Trey Phelps, Slade Alford, Devin Obie, because he's proven, right? He was a productive player at a good program last year. Nolan McCarthy, because we saw what he did at Kentucky. Right. Those guys either were productive this weekend in the case of McCarthy. Devin Obie also hit a couple home runs. But in the case of Trey Phelps, like he had at least one ball, maybe 2 that would have been home runs under normal conditions. But all day Saturday, which is when Georgia played 2 of its 4 games, the wind was howling in the entire time. And I think Georgia as a team had several balls that would have been out of Foley Field or even out of UNCW Stadium on a normal day. So that's why I say no, is I just think it was a weird weekend to hit. And the guys they needed to perform for the most part did perform. They put together good at-bats, and maybe they got a few bad breaks. The part that does worry me a little bit, or at least maybe not, if not worry, then maybe just an admission that they're going to have to experiment a little bit, is that this group of transfers that they're working through right now, whether it's Christian Adams, Rylan Zaborowski, Charlie Jones, Daniel Jackson, for the most part, those guys didn't really hit this weekend. And so is that, we've talked about this, there's risk when you bring in big transfer classes because you're not always going to bat 1,000. As a matter of fact, you're never going to bat 1,000 and you might not bat 300 every time.
Yeah.
And so is this group, was this bad weekend? That could be. Is this group maybe not as strong as last year's group or some other, the group at Kentucky the last couple of years? Like that could be true also. We'll just have to see. Robbie Burnett had a good weekend, but even that you could nitpick and say, well, he got hit by like 5 pitches. Like that's not going to happen most weekends.
Mm-hmm.
But I did write a story about him. And if you haven't read it, go check it out on the site. Like they're going to have to run more this year, kind of regardless of even in a best case scenario, they're probably still going to have to be a little more athletic offensively this year because they don't have Corey Collins and Charlie Condon. And Robbie Burnett does give them that element. Like I think there's a reasonable chance that he makes relatively easy work of the Georgia single season stolen base record if he stays healthy. It's 31, and he's got 7 already. So I think there's a pretty good chance that he at least challenges that record right away. So love the pitching. That passed every eye test I could have applied. The offense, I think it'll be a competent offense to a very good offense. If it's going to be a great offense, though, like some of those transfers that are new on the team this year are going to have better weekends than the one they had this weekend, I would say.
Yeah, and there are a lot of eyes on how Georgia has assembled their roster with, so transfer heavy. So, and to your point, just because it doesn't work one weekend, they have so much depth. They're just going to plug in different guys, and that's part of the advantage of bringing in so many experienced players, right? Because you have options. So I'm not worried about Georgia at all. I feel like they're going to be in the hunt all year, primarily because they're going to pitch so well. I mean, they give up 6 runs and was it 6 in the first inning and nothing the rest of the game Sunday. I mean, it was.
Yeah.
I mean, they're probably going to get a better start if Colton Smith doesn't scratch, maybe it looks a little different today, right? I mean, you just don't know. So I do feel like that that's a team that will, as they figure out the pieces and how to plug it into the puzzle, they're going to look a lot different, by April and May than they do right now.
Agreed. To wrap it up here, Mark, let's kind of, I'll just run through some of the results from some of everything else that was happening. And then you tell me if any of it is of particular interest to you or if anything stands out to you from what else we had. We had Tennessee just really taking it to poor Hofstra in 3 games. That the scores could have been so much worse if Tennessee really wanted them to be, frankly, but Tennessee got a lot of guys playing time. Shout out to Liam Doyle. Very good start for him on opening day. South Carolina swept Sacred Heart. The first game got a little dicey, but they got it done. The last 2 days were not close, so they got that sweep done. Mississippi State swept Manhattan. Alabama swept Bradley. The Friday game was maybe kind of competitive, maybe, but they got that sweep. Auburn did drop a game to Holy Cross, so there is that. I did get asked in a weekend waypoints message at some point this weekend if I should be concerned. I guess it was this morning, if I should be concerned about the offense, and I think if you score 2 runs against Holy Cross, you kind of have to be by default, maybe. At least maybe not concerned, but at least kind of raising an eyebrow at and questioning a little bit. So that's something to watch there. LSU, relatively easy work over Purdue Fort Wayne. Let me make sure I caught everything here. Kentucky splits 2 games with Lipscomb on Friday. They were scheduled to play Sunday. That got canceled because of field conditions and what have you. One really convincing win for Kentucky there, and then the loss was a really tough day for them offensively. And then Missouri lost a couple of games in Puerto Rico over the weekend. They did beat UConn, which is obviously hard to know what to think about that, because while UConn, yes, is a perennial regional team, they also are annually very slow out of the gate. And so it's I'm not quite sure what to make of it. They also took a blowout loss to Penn State, and then today lost to Stetson. And then A&M swept Elon. Game one of that was interesting. Elon has a legit Friday guy. Mitrovic is his last name. Very talented pitcher, could pitch pretty much anywhere he wants to. He's at Elon and gave A&M a lot of trouble. But once A&M settled into the game, they secured that and ended up getting the sweep. So of all of that, Mark, is there anything that stands out that you think deserves a little more examination?
Well, with Mizzou, I after the first day, I mean, you just got to flush that one. But the next 2 days, they scored, right? They had some offense going, and that was our big question: is would they be better offensively? And I think the answer, early on appears to be yes. The question now is, last year as the season went on, they became a pretty good pitching staff. So, I think that's still a work in progress at this point. The other thing is, with Auburn, brought in a ton of new players. I'm not surprised that maybe it's going to take them a little bit of time to find that right mixture. They're one of these clubs that have, maybe three or four everyday guys are going to be there, and then a whole bunch of others that you can mix and match, and trying to understand the right matchups and which buttons to push there. I think it's going to take a little time. And Kentucky might be like that too, because they brought in a lot of new players. Where maybe they're a different club, in April, just because of so much roster turnover. And I think baseball's always been a sport with a lot of volatility, but it's even more so now with the portal. So I do feel like, we always say you're going to be a different team in April than you are in February, and I think for these teams that went through heavy turnover, that's to the extreme. I really do feel like there are going to be some growing pains early.
Yeah, I'm interested in Kentucky, and I think it's going to be hard to get a real good feel for them, because they played 2 games on opening day and that's it. They're scheduled to play Morehead State at home on Tuesday, but the high is below freezing supposedly for that day in Lexington. So it seems unlikely that game's going to get played. So it might not be until next weekend, and then who knows? I know midweek where I live in the Carolinas, which is pretty decent, drive away from Lexington, but still, middle of the week supposed to be bitterly cold. We got some snow coming in the Carolinas, so even next weekend could that be dicey? I guess I'm pulling up their schedule now to make sure that they're back in Nashville next weekend, which again, not the warmest place in the world at this time of year either. So, we'll see. It just feels like it may be a situation because of things out of their control, like namely the weather, that we may not get a real extended look at them for a while. And therefore it's going to be, and that's tough for a team in their position, right? If this was last year's team, I'd be a lot less worried about it. So it was like, well, these guys are old and a good chunk have been together and we're in a super regional last year and, all that kind of stuff. Whereas this year's team is like, they need games because it is such a new team and a younger team. And so not ideal, but it is what it is. You gotta deal with reality on reality's terms. So, all right, Mark, I think that is a show. We got through opening weekend, mostly despite some weather concerns, mostly unscathed. Everybody, save for Kentucky in that situation. I think most everybody got their games in, even if they had to. I didn't mention, because I don't think it was on the scoreboard today. One of the other results, Arkansas and Washington State, late catch there. Couple close games there, but I think Washington State is, Washington State's better than some of these teams that we just rattled off. And so, I'm not too bent out of shape about some close games there. So I believe they have one more Monday, if I'm not mistaken.
They do. Yeah. Beetleshees is going to throw.
Oh, Landon Beetleshees. Yeah. Okay. That'll be fun. I will be in Conway again tomorrow, but I will be paying attention to that game as well, because I do want to see what he looks like in the Arkansas uniform. So that was one result I failed just because I was looking at the Sunday scoreboard and they did not play Sunday. So, all right. that is going to do it for this edition of Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at d1baseball.com. Just as a quick programming note, if you are new to the site, new to the podcast, all that stuff, first of all, welcome. The format is basically this. Mark and I, whether we record Sunday or Monday, it kind of depends on travel stuff and real life stuff. But we'll have an episode up Monday or at the worst early Tuesday to recap the weekend. I also do an episode later in the week. Typically, I reserve the right to do a little different format, but typically I interview a beat writer from one of the SEC teams to really do a deep dive on that one specific team. And so 2 episodes a week. One is me and a guest. One is me and Mark recapping the weekend all the way through the end of the regular season. So that's us here at Highway to Hoover. We would appreciate it if you're just jumping in. If you joined us for the rest of the season, we have a lot of fun doing this and chopping it up every single weekend. Thank you to our sponsors, Academy Sports and Outdoors and Tecovas Boots. Very happy to have both of those folks on board with us. Thank you to Mark, as always, for joining me. There we go. And thank you, the listeners,